Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. Recently, it has been reported that Electronic Arts is hiring for a position in the Vancouver location for a lead online engineer for a new Star Wars open-world game currently in development. I had heard this, and my first response was one of general apathy. In all honesty, the only surprising aspect of this job listing isn't that it exists, but that people were actually somehow surprised by its existence. And while EA has since updated the job posting to remove the statements about an open-world game, it has already been making the rounds despite this being a well-known direction for EA that apparently sites like PC Gamer never really got the memo on. We've known for literally years that EA has wanted to move more towards these style of games due to their easy incorporation of quote-unquote live services. But what are live services? Well, it's a combination between the idea of software as a service, such as EA Access and Origins Access, which is a subscription service that provides guaranteed recurring revenue for EA, coupled with their standard microtransactions and loot box gambling mechanics in order to further increase revenue in what they've termed an uncapped subscription model. It is, of course, a business model that sounds all well and good as long as one doesn't look beyond the surface, but once we delve into it, it becomes clear that once again, this is a business model that ultimately only benefits the publisher and their wallets. However, that particular topic will be reserved for another video at a later date and is not the purpose of this video. No, the purpose of this video is to discuss why this job listing is not a surprise in the least, and also what we can most likely expect to see from this open world game being headed up by EA's Vancouver Studio. So first off, we know that EA has been wanting an open world game that can generate recurring revenue via microtransactions and their loot boxes for years to come. We also know very well that they want one of these games to be a Star Wars title. The evidence of this is literally plastered all over the internet and is easily obtainable given the simplest of searches. Our first one comes from Patrick Soderlund's announcement of the closure of Visceral Games. The reason for this was due to Visceral creating a linear Star Wars game that didn't align with what EA stated as fundamental shifts in the marketplace. This basically boiled down to Visceral not making a game that was friendly to the live services and microtransaction and loot box monetizations that EA is so obviously thirsty for. The second is the simple fact that both Blake Jorgensen and Patrick Soderlund have outright stated this was the type of game they've been wanting for quite a while. Over 2 years ago, Patrick Soderlund stated that these types of games were the, quote, strategic direction that they were wanting to move in. Follow that up a year later with Blake Jorgensen reaffirming the fact that EA still wants to break into that style of game. But why? Well, because it's a very popular genre within video games that EA has yet to have really made any direct inroads into, and a GTA 5 style game would fit EA's ideas surrounding live service games perfectly. Grand Theft Auto V is, to this day, still a massive moneymaker for Take-Two Interactive, owing entirely to its online gameplay microtransactions. Those in themselves take next to no effort to be developed and are near to 100% pure profit for the game's developers and publishers, which is the exact game model that EA finds so attractive. The concept of zero or near zero effort and expenditures for constant recurring revenue streams. It is the holy grail for a publishing company like EA, and they are slobbering over the prospect of developing their own money printer like a dog staring at a prime cut of steak. And as I said before, EA wants this foray into a GTA 5 style game to be a Star Wars game for some very obvious reasons. First off is the automatic guaranteed sales. Star Wars as a brand has universal recognition worldwide. It is one of, if not the most beloved science fiction franchise in history, regardless of whether it be movies, television, or gaming. And what this means to a publisher like EA is clearly evident that even when they attempt to implement an objectively pay-to-win microtransaction system like they did with Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA, they still manage to sell millions of copies despite the backlash their blatant greed created. EA's announced monetization of Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA, which for the most part pulls the fangs out of the loot boxes within the game, is a direct and obvious attempt to not completely alienate the Star Wars fanbase. If you recall, equally predatory microtransactions and pay-to-win mechanics are present within games like FIFA 18, which remain firmly in place. Now, this paints a very clear picture that EA will only act in regards to their predatory business models in order to outdate the outrage and help protect their future Star Wars titles. Obviously, they're wanting to turn Star Wars Battlefront into their next yearly iterative shiny thing like the Battlefield franchise, a business model that very much places graphics over gameplay, style over substance, as it were. The previous 2 Star Wars Battlefront EA titles shows very clearly that this is the box they want those games placed in, assuming they haven't decided to abandon the Battlefront titles altogether in favor of the new game being worked on by Respawn Entertainment that is slated for release during EA's 2020 fiscal year. But what can we expect from this new title being developed by the Vancouver Studio that is replacing the Star Wars game that was being developed by the now dead Visceral Games? Well, there are a couple of different possibilities. One very real possibility is the waste not, want not approach, which will mean that many of the visual assets and possibly even the story that were already developed for the now dead Star Wars game might be reused or otherwise modified to fit into the new open world setting that EA so eagerly desires. This would most likely be a game that fits more into the Assassin's Creed style game that will still allow for both single player and multiplayer gameplay and, knowing EA, will most likely also include different styles or sets of microtransactions based upon which aspect of the game you're playing. One can also safely assume that the story mode will be somewhat truncated, lasting no more than 8 to 12 hours. We can infer this given the average story length of any non-BioWare related game published by EA in recent years. Also, games like Witcher 3 have enjoyed phenomenal success with over 33 million copies sold since its release, not to mention massive sales of multiple DLC packages that are the same amount of content as game expansions that gamers used to enjoy back in the day, one expansion being virtually a full game unto itself. The Witcher 3 won Game of the Year in 2015, and its expansion, Wild Hunt, won multiple Game of the Year awards in 2016. This in spite of Blake Jorgensen and EA stating more than once that linear games or story-driven games are no longer popular. These assertions are nothing more than EA trying to create a will-to-power situation that explains their desire to move away from meaningful stories within their games, aspects of the games that are very costly to produce, I might add, and attempt to explain their desire to solely focus on the cheap-to-produce aspects that will allow them to maximize their profits. And therein lies the crux of the matter. You see, EA has shown time and time again that they care little to nothing in regards to the characters and the stories within their games. They have continued to blatantly lie to their customers in that regard and have been proven false time and time again. EA is definitely interested in churning out games with the best graphics they possibly can, coupled with some truly magnificent musical scores to go along with them, but all of EA's offerings for years have each been as vacuously empty as Blake Jorgensen's soul. Implementing predatory business models, employing psychologists in order to better refine the Skinner boxes that are their games, and manipulating the gameplay in order to maximize their profits, this new open-world Star Wars game will most likely continue on with EA's proud tradition of industry fuckery, sans pay-to-win loot boxes. They will continue to implement those in all their other games, but you can bet your backside that EA won't risk alienating the Star Wars fans too much. No, they will claim they learned their lesson while continuing to inject the same shady practices in games like FIFA 18 and UFC. But they have failed and will continue to fail to grasp the concept behind why Grand Theft Auto V was met with so much success. The reason being is they created a game that was, at its core, very good. It was a game that interested people enough to be able to keep playing. EA is incapable of understanding that. All that we'll most likely see with this open-world Star Wars title is but a shadow of a game. Yes, it will have stunning graphics, and yes, it will have amazing music, but that's all it will have. EA is quite literally incapable of understanding anything else. They think that's all you need to make a successful game, and it is because of that that the game will sell extremely well initially, but will most likely be abandoned just as quickly as both the Star Wars Battlefront EA games were before it. But as always, please do let me know what you think down in the comments below, and if you would be so kind as to hit that subscribe button if you're interested in hearing more from Mamook with a mic on this topic and others, it would be an amazing help. Also, being YouTube has decided that you don't need to know when new videos come out, don't forget to ring that bell in order to stay up to date on gaming news, industry commentary, and the occasional review. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.